Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of September of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. So as we discussed in the previous video, the West 2025 military exercises has begun. The Russians and the Belarusians began publishing first videos from these military exercises. As we discussed in the previous videos, up to 12 or 13,000 people, soldiers are involved in this operation, but military experts usually say that sometimes and usually this number is much higher, probably 5 or 6 times more. So when talking about this, and if we consider these let's say numbers, we can say that up to 60 or 70,000 soldiers are involved in these military exercises. The only question I have, how many Russian soldiers are involved and how many Belarusian soldiers are involved in these exercises. Once again, I would like to remind you that the last military exercises took place in 2021, and after those exercises the Russians didn't leave the territory of the Republic of Belarus, and then the Russians using those forces attacked the city of Kiev in 2022. So basically that was the beginning of the special military operation. Of course, now everybody is asking themselves the same question, whether the Russians are planning to remove these 10, 20, 30 or 60 soldiers from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, or they will keep them there with the purpose to increase tensions along the border with Ukraine. So if everything goes wrong, the Russians will always have possibilities to react very fast and to attack Ukraine in its northwestern part. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. As of the 12th of September of 2025, the Russian authorities made lots of very interesting statements about the behavior of Poland. Russia has urged Poland to reconsider its decision to close the border with Belarus, warning of serious consequences if Warsaw does not reserve course quickly. Foreign Minister spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said she stressed that Poland's confrontational steps are designed to justify further escalation in the heart of the Europe. So this is very interesting. So as you can see, the Russians are trying to probably discover or to show that there is no problems from the Russian and the Belarusian side, but the threat is coming from the European countries. Russia has never threatened anyone, including European countries. That was stated by Peskov. You know that another important thing is that today and during these days we got reports that Warsaw and the Baltic state and Finland probably would send soldiers to the territory of Ukraine with the purpose to get experience in fighting with drones. And during these days we were talking about this. And for example, the Russians commented the situation as well. No one except London, Paris and the Baltic states is eager to send troops to Ukraine, understanding the consequences. But today we got report that Poland is not going to send any forces on the territory of Ukraine. Today we got report that Polish military will not go to Ukraine. Drone interception exercises will only take place on Polish territory. So this is very interesting, and this means that we're not going to see Polish soldiers along the line of combat contact, because I would like to remind you that Russia several days ago stated that any soldier, any foreign trooper on the territory of Ukraine will be considered as a legitimate target for the Russian forces. So obviously the Polish authorities understand that it's too early to start suffering losses not in the Polish war, especially under the control of the president of Karol Nawrocki, because he just recently have become a president of Poland. So that is why he doesn't want to ruin his reputation, and he wants to probably to hold this power in his hands for as long as possible. Anyway, let's discuss now the situation in Ukraine, and first let's talk about the most important direction, about the Zaporizhzhia direction. You know that currently we can see a very interesting picture. You know that since the beginning of May, or even since the beginning of April, every single military expert have been talking just about one thing, about the Pokrovsk offensive operation, that this year the Russians are going to try to take under complete control the city of Pokrovsk, the city of Mirnograd. So everybody was talking about this. If you remember, even we have some insights that Putin during his meeting with Trump told him that that Russia would take under complete control the Donetsk region by the end of this year, by the end of 2025. So a lot of talks, a lot of rumors, all these things, as we can see, forced Zelensky and forced the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, to keep as much as possible forces exactly in this area. The best forces of Ukraine, the best armies, the best units, the best FPV drone crews are located exactly in this area, and they are tasked just for one thing: not to allow the Russians to establish complete control over the Donetsk region by the end of this year. So, and it seems that this is exactly what the Russians wanted. We see that the Russians stopped any offensive operation in the area of breakthrough to the northeast of the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians are not moving at all. Yes, we have some movements from the Ukrainian side, but it seems that this is okay with the Russians, because despite the fact that we don't see any progress and any movements in the most important direction that been talking a lot since the beginning of this year, the Russians have huge advances in the Zaporizhzhia direction, in the Siversk direction, and in the Kupiansk direction. So it seems that this is exactly what the Russians wanted. They wanted to force Ukrainians to probably to reduce defense capabilities of every single direction in favor of the Donetsk direction, and now the Russians are moving without facing any problems, barriers, or significant resistance from the Ukrainian side. So let's discuss Zaporizhzhia. And first, let's talk about the western direction. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, and it seems that the Russians finished the battle for the most southern parts of this area. So, as you can see, the Russians most likely stabilized the situation to the south of the city of Stepnogorsk. It seems that to begin more or less powerful offensive operation further in the northern direction, first the Russians would try to improve their positions along these tree lines, along these fortifications. They will try to improve their foothold. This will allow the Russians to move further in the northern direction using broad frontline attack. During the previous 24 hours, the additional changes, as you can see, were recorded by Russian sources and by neutral mappers. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians established complete FPV drone and fire control over the main supply arteria that goes from the city of Zaporizhzhia towards the settlement of Stepnogorsk. Now we see that Ukrainians have less chances to cross this road without being hit by Russians. So this is something like a siege with complete blockade from the south and total control of main supply arterias from the north. It's very difficult to say when the Russians will try to begin their first offensive, but obviously this is going to happen very soon. Now let's talk about the area of responsibilities of the group of forces east. We are talking about the territory to the north and to the northeast of the settlements of Guliai-Polye, and to the south and the southeast of the settlement of Pokrovska. So we're talking about this territory. As you can see, we have huge changes on the ground. The Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, as you can see. And before we start, I believe that it's better to discuss everything once again from the 3rd of September of 2025, because the 3rd of September, it seems that was the date when the Russian offensive operation probably intensified significantly, and it was something like a turning point in the entire battle for this area. So once again, this is the situation by the end of the 3rd of September of 2025, and according to information we have, by the end of the 4th of September, the Russians took under complete control the village of Novoselovka. Furthermore, the Russians by the end of the 5th of September managed to improve their positions around Kamushevacha, and they began their offensive operation further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the village of Ternova. By the end of the 6th of September, the Russians took under control the village of Хороши. At least this information was reported by different pro-Russian resources without proofs, let's say without significant proofs from very reliable resources. By the end of the 7th of September, this information was confirmed by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Later, the Russians, without any stop, continued offensive operation further and managed to outflank the settlement of Termova from the north, and Ukrainians lost any supply and support in this village, and they began retreating from this territory. By the end of the 9th of September, the Russians reported that they managed to answer the eastern outskirts of the village of Ternova, and the clashes began there. Furthermore, the Russians for the first time reported that they also answered the village of Sosnovka, but without any changes, as you can see. By the end of the 10th of September, the clashes for these two territories have been continued, and by the end of the 11th of September, we got reports that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Sosnovka, and by the end of the 12th of September, the Russians reported that they also managed to capture the village of Ternova. So we see that every single day we are coloring something. Sometimes we are coloring just another stronghold or another true line or another fortification. Sometimes we color the entire village or entire town. Today the group of forces East published this video where we can see how Russians were raising the Russian flags in different parts of the settlement. There were 3 flags recorded. The first flag was raised in the northern part, the second one in the central part around these buildings, and the third flag was raised in the most southern part in the vicinity around these farms. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map by coloring everything, not just on the territory of the village of Ternova, but everything behind the village, almost until the settlements of Malivka, Kamyshevacha, and Shevchenka. Furthermore, these are not the only updates that were published by the Russian resources. Furthermore, neutral mappers reported that during the same period of time, during the previous 24-48 hours, the Russians improved their positions around the village of Sosnovka in the northwestern direction and in the southern directions. So these territories were secured by the Russians, and furthermore, the pro-Ukrainian resource of Deep State reported that the Russians managed to take under complete control the village of Ternova and the territories to the west. So the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, and the most important, the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Beryozovo from the south, from the east, and from the north. The Ukrainians most likely will show some resistance in this area, but most likely they will be forced to fall back from this area in very coming hours, because today several pro-Russian resources also reported that the settlement of Novonikolaevka was also taken by the Russians, and the Ukrainians obviously are already semi-encircled and caught in pincers by the Russians from many directions. And we start receiving first videos from the village of Kalinovskaya. Here we can see how Russians were bombing the settlement with artillery and with FABs, which means that most likely currently the clashes are taking place for this village, and everything behind this village in the direction of the Russian positions most likely have been already taken by the Russians by the end of the 12th of September. Now we understand what exactly the Russians are trying to achieve. The Russians will move further along these lakes and water reservoirs. Now we understand that the first thing the Russians are tasked for to take under complete control these territories. So to break through, to dig in deeper, and to cut the entire direction into several blocks that the Russians will handle with every single one separately. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions in the area of the villages by the name of Novonikolaevka and Poltavka. So this information this morning was provided by pro-Russian resources. So as you can see, the situation for Ukrainians is very difficult. We see that they can't stabilize the situation, and we see that the situation is going to become even worse with comparison with the current status. And at the same time, we don't see any report that Ukrainians began redeployments of their forces, let's say from the Pokrovsk direction in the area of Zaporizhzhia. For now, the Ukrainians this Syrsky commander-in-chief relies just on the forces that are located there without giving them additional units and additional reinforcement. It's very difficult to say for how long he is planning to save this situation. Maybe first he is trying to cut the area of breakthrough, and then he will send this secure and probably stabilization team in this area. Very difficult to understand, because as of now, we see that around the city of Pokrovsk there are still a lot of things to do for the armored forces of Ukraine, and obviously they will, if Ukrainians will continue moving with the same rate, as we can see right now, during the previous 24 hours additional changes were recorded. We understand that it will take Syrsky probably maybe a month to finish the battle for this territory, but obviously within the months the Russians can take under control, complete control, not just this pocket but also the towns of Pokrovskaya, Velika Mikhailovka, and Gulay Polya. So now Syrsky is up to make very important decision whether to stop counterattacks in the area of breakthrough and to begin sending troops and forces in directions where Ukrainians suffer huge problems. And this is not the Zaporizhzhia direction, this is also the Siversk, the Liman direction, or to keep or to rely just the units and forces that are at these localities, and that's it. but this position might lead to unpredictable consequences for Syrsky. This led to complete collapse and defeat of the Ukrainian army. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. As we discussed during the previous video, the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 11th of September. The Ukrainians secured the territory to the south of the settlement of Vladimirovka. By the end of the 12th of September, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions around the Shakhovo pocket, and Ukrainians continued these counterattacks with the purpose to restore control and to force the Russians to fall back, probably almost until the road of N32. Everything is possible. This thing is also possible. Who knows? The question is not whether the Ukrainians are able to force the Russians to fall back behind the road of N32. The question is the price that Ukrainians are going to pay for this. They can pay the significant price for this, and they can pay not just the price of human lives. They can pay with territories around the city of Kupiansk, around the city of Siversk, Liman, and of course around the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. Anyway, the Ukrainians counterattacked. The Russians today bombed the settlement of Shakhovo. This is the video how Russians were bombing the area with FABs or with total flamethrower system. Another important thing that right before we started making this video, the pro-Russian resources published another video of how Russians were bombing Ukrainians in the central part of the settlement of Vladimirovka. So this territory was bombed. So before the next video, we will color this area in Ukrainian favor, and it seems that indeed the Ukrainians are counter-attacking and the Ukrainians are restoring their lost positions. Once again, as for now, we shouldn't focus on these territories. We shouldn't even focus probably in the area of, let's say, Pokrovsk agglomeration. It seems that it's something like attempt from the Russian side to force the Ukrainians to think that this is the primary target. The primary target, it seems, for Russians is the Zaporizhzhia direction and the city of Siversk and Liman, but not even the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So as for now, it's very difficult to make any conclusions. I believe that it's better to wait a bit and everything will become clear very soon. As for the Siversk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and as you can see, another day brought us lots of videos of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine to the south, to the southeast, to the north, and to the northwest of the city of Siversk. The Russians continue hunting and destroying Ukraine FPV drone positions. You know that several pro-Ukraine resources reported that the Russians brought some very smart general in this area. This general has just one task, according to pro-Ukraine resource, to hunt and to destroy Ukrainian FPV drone crews. And this source says that the Russians invest everything they have for these purposes. So as of the 12th of September of 2025, the most important, to my opinion, activity is taking place on the line between Yampol and the settlement of Dronovka. This is very important video. For example, here we can see how Russians were bombing some constructions or farms or a settlement along the river of Seversky Donets, and it seems that it's not just attacks, it's something like final attack before the beginning of the river crossing operation. It seems that the Russians are planning to cross the river of Seversky Donets exactly in this point, and to carry out something like this, the Russians will attack this area from the north. They will answer this territory from the Serebryanka forest, and they will try to take this village or some constructions under complete control, and then Russians will try to move further in the western or in the southwestern direction, something like this. They will try to attack Ukrainians from behind to ruin Ukrainian logistic, and then to attack the city of Siversk from the northwest. Furthermore, we start receiving first videos from the settlement of Yampol, and here we can see FPV drone attacks. Furthermore, as we can see, the Russians redeployed Akhmat unit, Akhmat Special Forces, with it's very powerful and strong FPV drone crew, and which main purpose to secure the territory with FPV drones and maybe to be involved in the assault operation that most likely are going to start very soon. All in all, the Russians most likely will try to take under control these territories in coming days. As for now, the Russians most likely are trying to understand whether the Ukrainians are going to bring some reinforcements there or not, and then they will begin their offensive. If this pocket falls between Yampol, Dronovka, and Dibrova, then it's going to be very difficult for Ukrainians to stabilize the situation, and they would be forced to begin retreating from the city of Syrsk. But who knows what is on the mind of Syrsky? Maybe he has already lost the battle in the city of Syrsk, and now it's just attempt to win some time, to win another week, 2 or months before Ukrainians are trying to finish the battle for the Pokrovsk breakthrough area. The Russians, during the previous 24 hours, made lots of very interesting attempts to test Ukrainian defense further in the western direction from the river of Nitrius. So the Russians began sending forces in this area with the purpose to take under control the villages of Alexandrivka, Krymki, and Karovy Yar. And we see that according to several neutral mappers and pro-Russian resources, the Ukrainians don't show any resistance. If Russians realize that Ukrainians are not going to stop them in this area, most likely they will try to move even further till the river of Oskol and to cut supply and support of the entire Barova direction. As for the Barova direction, during the previous 24 hours, lots of strikes were recorded. The Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions with FABs, with artillery, but as you can see, without any changes. As for the Kupiansk direction, the same story. The Russians were bombing the settlement of Peshchano with TOS flamethrower system, and the Russians attacked the main supply roads between the western and the eastern bank of the river Oskol with missile. Once again, this road was damaged and destroyed. Probably Ukrainians most likely will restore these roads in coming days, in coming hours, but as of now, the situation has become very difficult. And once again, this is something like a tradition in the Kupiansk direction. Every time before the Russians begin another wave of offensive operation in this area, first they attack and destroy pontoon bridges, different bridges, with the purpose to ruin Ukrainian logistics. So if Russians began bombing and attacking this territory, I believe we should expect that in coming days we're going to see additional changes on the ground, and most likely once again in Russian favor. And as you can see, the Russians are advancing everywhere, just not with exception in the Pokrovsk direction, which means that maybe this is something that was probably at the beginning, let's say, what that was exactly tasked and planned at the beginning. So I don't know, but we will understand this very soon. And that's it for today. Military with Samurai channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.